So, we talked a little bit about the UiPath ecosystem in the last um, video, and I think it might be a good idea for me to, before I move on to deep diving into Orchestrator, clarify some things. Um, there are two types of robots, which, if you're more than just a, baby user of UiPath, you probably know, but it it is important that I briefly go over this. Attended robots are the kind that you need a human being in the loop when the tasks that they do are executed. An example might be maybe you need to log into an application because it has OKTA authentication or two-factor authentication, right? Before the robot can continue the task that you normally do after you've logged into the application. So, in other words, you need a human being somewhere in the loop to sort of validate the process of logging in. That's just an example now. There are ways around that. That would be an example of an attended robot. Basically, anything that a human being needs to be involved before the robot can complete a sequence of activities that are required to complete a transaction, right? That would be an attended robot. An unattended one is if the robot can finish a job or a task, no matter how complicated, without the need for any kind of human intervention, right? So that's important to know. Two key differences, and you have in the real world you will come across both types of robots. Although the ideal situation is the RPA engineer or developer is supposed to, as much as possible, tend towards the unattended kind, so that there's less human intervention. But it is also good to know that it's not always possible. So now that you know, I think what is relevant in the case of Orchestrator is that you cannot trigger from Orchestrator an attended robot. And of course, the other thing to note about that is attended robots typically cannot run under a lock screen. Like if your Windows computer is off, or you know how it like logs out and just hibernates. You won't be able to run an attended robot that way. Um, so that's important to note, right? Whereas you can do that with an unattended robots, provided they have credentials to the machine, and they don't require like user interface interaction. So for attended robots, they can only be started from UiPath Assistant or the command prompt. Now this is the UiPath Assistant. You can start any robot from here. This is what it looks like, right? So if it's attended, you can also click it from here, right? However, there's an exception. If you're a developer, right? Provided the robot is in your personal workspace, you can trigger it from Orchestrator, right? But that's not always the case, because like when you're in production, it no longer will be under your own personal folder, right? So that's why what we talked about earlier is a little bit relevant. But while you're in development, it is possible for you to trigger an attended robot from the orchestrator, okay? So now, we'll talk a bit about the UiPath Assistant, because I feel like, when we were talking about this slide, we didn't really go too deeply into that. The UiPath Assistant is like, basically a personal assistant. It's like a remote control that triggers your robots. You don't always have to be the one who physically, presses play like this, like the way I was going to do here, right? To trigger an automation. You can tell the orchestrator to do that for you. But so it's like a bridge between this UiPath Studio right here, the integrated development environment, and the orchestrator, which is here, right? So just giving you a visual while I'm talking about this. And what does it do? It keeps track of what's happening to the robots. It sends notifications. As a matter of fact, there's a whole slide about what it does right next. So we'll just go to that. Okay, hold on a minute. Right. So what is the UiPath Assistant? It's a centralized hub for managing and executing automation tasks that were created in the UiPath Studio, or Automation Hub. What are the things it does? It does task management. It does bot execution. It sends notifications, and then you can customize settings like notifications, sources, integration of UiPath with other products. And then, of course, like we said, it integrates the UiPath Studio with the UiPath Orchestrator, right? So the main thing to know is that it's a bridge between both worlds, right? Both the Studio and the Orchestrator, even as we have illustrated here, you know. The UiPath Assistant, which I have called UiPath Robot here, is the bridge between these two, right? And in the real world, it actually every 30 seconds sends like a ping from the Studio to the Orchestrator to make sure that they are still connected, right? So now that I've said that, we can go back to the UiPath Orchestrator and talk about what is it. So by now you have a good sense of the fact that it's a control center. Now the one we're looking at, it's like a control room, right? The one we're looking at, oh, I'm logged out here, I think. Yeah, the one we're looking at here is not very complicated, but you could have up to hundreds of automations. Like I have the one I have here is just 3 automations. It's not very big, but you could have hundreds of automation in a very large organization, and you have to organize when they run, how long they run, which computer they're going to run on, who has access to which process, and it can get very, very complicated. Okay, and that's where Orchestrator comes in. What does it do? It helps you to manage resources. Like, okay, which robots do what? Which computers are they going to use? Are there enough licenses for them to do the jobs, right? Now, I showed you a really small set of processes, right? And I mentioned that it could easily be hundreds that you're controlling. So you have to decide, okay, maybe say for example, these two need to be run at the same time. That means you cannot run them on the same computer. They need to be run around the same time. You need to allocate that, okay, computer A or virtual machine, which is like a cloud machine, that is not in your premises, right? Might be the one that will run this one at about the same time this one that I have checked is running on your local machine, right? So that they can both run on time when they're supposed to. So all of that can be organized from here, and that would be an example of managing resources. Controlling access is a different attribute of Orchestrator. Now, why do I say controlling access? Remember, if I said if you click on tenants, consider the tenant to be like the organizational wide folder, right? Whereas any one of these would be like departments. As a matter of fact, if I wanted to like create a new department, I could do something like this. Just click, I would do something like this and say maybe finance department, right? Then all of the robots that are used by finance departments would be put so that it helps and make sure this is checked and you create. So what happens now is that any robot that is going to be used or for finance department functionality will be in this folder, and it's a good idea for, say, like this new Yinka robots here. You should be able to separate access to these robots from access to this folder, for example. So this might be marketing department, this might be administrative department, next might be some other department, right? And it is quite reasonable to expect that you don't really want people who are not in the finance department to be poking around with resources that belong to the finance department, right? So somebody has to organize that. Okay, who has access to these robots? Who can run them? Which resources do they have access to? Which computers can they use and do they use? So those kinds of things are what we refer to when we say controlling access, right? In an oversimplified manner, I don't want resources from New Yinka to be accessed by people who work in the finance department, because really they have no business with this department, right? So that makes kind of logical sense, right? So that's an example of what Orchestrator does. And the third thing is it connects with other software. I mean, it's not uncommon for you to need other softwares, to do your tasks. As an example, your process might be log into your one ERP, right? And then you also need to log into another ERP, and then you need to move data from one ERP to the other. But it's quite possible that you can, instead of doing that through the normal computer screen where you use the user interface to log in, download something, do some manipulation, and then enter it into the second ERP, you could actually arrange for the two softwares to talk to each other from the back end using API integrations and the like. And UiPath does have that kind of functionality. Like, let me see if I can show you just a peep. Just give me a moment. Like, there you go. So we have to move this. You can really see it. So yeah, integration service I'm trying to reach. So you have a lot of, you can connect, to different software, Adobe, Bedrock Connect, but depending on what you're trying to accomplish, AWS, Bamboo HR Box, through the back end, using customized integrations or APIs, right? That have already been pre-made, and you just need to sort of fit it to your needs. And these are higher complexity use cases, but also included in the functionality of UiPath Orchestrator. Okay, something as simple as connecting to Gmail, for example, is an example. Maybe, yeah, there it is, right here. You want to connect to Gmail, right? And maybe you wanted to go to a Gmail account, read certain emails, download certain things, and then put those things into somewhere. So instead of you manually logging into Gmail every time, you can connect it from the back end here, right? This button, and then configure the things that you need it to do, so that it kind of just runs on the back end. It's a lot faster, right? So those are just examples of potential use cases, and also illustrate the functionality of UiPath Orchestrator. Okay. All right. So what are the main things that UiPath Orchestrator does? We're going to talk about in the next video. So look forward to seeing you guys then. Thank you for watching. Bye.